It is 218 BC. Hannibal Barca, fresh from his stunning victory at the Battle of Trebia, pushes his Carthaginian army deep into Roman territory. Behind his lines, the city of Carthage, the richest mercantile power of the Mediterranean, hums with the machinery of war. Its ships, the envy of the ancient world, ferry supplies and taxes to the front. But the war is expensive. Very expensive. To fund the immense cost of this conflict, Carthage relies on its vast treasury of silver, accumulated through centuries of shrewd trade. Yet, even this immense hoard begins to dwindle. The state, rather than raising taxes or securing new external loans, turns to a more subtle, insidious form of funding. Silver coins, once pure, are quietly minted with an increasing proportion of copper. The citizens, at first unaware, soon find their carefully hoarded wealth buying less. Confidence begins to erode, not with a bang, but with the quiet, persistent whisper of debasement. Empires, like all living things, are born, mature, and eventually decline. But their demise is rarely random. Look closely enough, and a consistent financial pathology emerges. A predictable sequence of monetary mistakes, often born of success and hubris, repeatedly undermines the very foundations of their power. This channel decodes the repeating patterns, the money mechanics that dictate the rise and fall of great powers. By the end of this journey, you will recognize the universal warning signs, the financial tells that precede every collapse, from ancient Carthage to the modern era. The cycle begins, almost invariably, with sound money. An empire rises on the back of a reliable currency, often backed by precious metals or a clear commitment to fiscal discipline. This foundation of trust allows for efficient trade, capital formation, and the funding of public works and defensive infrastructure. Carthage, in its mercantile prime, meticulously controlled its silver mines in Spain and its coinage, ensuring stability that fueled its vast trading network. The Roman Republic, for centuries, maintained the purity of its silver denarius, around 3.9 grams of nearly pure silver, which became the standard across its expanding domain. This initial period is marked by productive investment and the accumulation of real wealth. Think of it as the building of a sturdy house, brick by careful brick, financed with a clear ledger. However, success often breeds ambition, and ambition, debt. The second stage sees empires embark on expansionary projects, vast military campaigns, monumental infrastructure, or ambitious social programs. These endeavors are often initially funded by taxation or, more commonly, by borrowing. The state issues bonds, takes loans, and promises future tax revenues for present expenditures. This is not inherently problematic, as long as the underlying economic activity can sustain the debt. But the temptation to expand beyond sustainable means is powerful. For Rome, the scale of its empire and its constant military needs, particularly after the Punic Wars and subsequent civil conflicts, saw its expenditures spiral. By the time of the late Republic and early Empire, Rome's budget was perpetually strained by the need to maintain legions across vast distances. The reliance on ever-increasing debt began to become a habit, like a homeowner taking out an equity loan, then another, without increasing their income. When the capacity to tax or borrow from external sources reaches its limit, the third, and most destructive, mistake occurs: currency debasement. This is the empire's desperate attempt to print its way out of trouble. For ancient empires, this meant reducing the precious metal content of their coinage. For modern states, it means increasing the supply of fiat currency. The Roman denarius, which began as nearly pure silver, saw its silver content systematically reduced. Under Nero, around 60 AD, the silver content was cut to 90%. By Trajan's reign, it was 85%. Caracalla, in 215 AD, introduced a new coin, the Antoninianus, which was ostensibly worth 2 denarii but contained only about 50% more silver than a single denarius, effectively devaluing the existing currency. By the time of Gallienus in the mid-3rd century, the denarius was less than 5% silver. The state receives more units of currency for its spending, but each unit is worth less. This is the point at which the house on credit begins to rot from within. This leads directly to the fourth financial mistake, the loss of confidence and spiraling inflation. As the currency's purchasing power declines, citizens lose trust in its value. They hoard real assets, land, goods, actual precious metals, and rush to spend their rapidly depreciating currency. Merchants raise prices to compensate for the instability, creating a vicious cycle of inflation. In Rome, this debasement led to rampant inflation, known as the crisis of the 3rd century. Prices for goods skyrocketed. Soldiers, paid in increasingly worthless coins, demanded higher wages or payment in kind. Trade became difficult, as no one trusted the value of money over time. Farmers, unable to sell their produce for a stable price, retreated to subsistence farming, crippling the empire's economic base. The sophisticated monetary system of Rome, once the engine of its power, became a mechanism for its destruction. Imagine trying to build a new road when the cost of materials doubles every week. Mid-roll question: which empire do you think we are most like right now, facing these early warning signs? Tell me below. The 5th mistake, an inevitable consequence of debasement and inflation, is the decline of the reserve currency status. For an empire's currency to be dominant, it must be trusted globally as a store of value and a medium of exchange. When confidence erodes internally, it vanishes externally. Other trading partners refuse to accept the debased currency or demand significant discounts. They seek alternative stores of value. In ancient Rome, this meant that trade with external territories or even within certain provinces began to revert to barter or the use of foreign, more stable currencies, such as Persian silver. The empire could no longer project its economic power beyond its borders, let alone within them, using its own money. Its monetary house of cards could no longer hold. The 6th mistake is the attempt at price controls and coercive economic measures. Faced with hyperinflation and a collapsing economy, governments often resort to desperate measures. Diocletian, in 301 AD, issued his edict on maximum prices, attempting to fix prices for over 1,000 goods and services and cap wages. The penalty for exceeding these prices was death. The edict was a spectacular failure. Merchants hoarded goods, refusing to sell at unprofitable prices, leading to widespread shortages. The black market flourished. Farmers ceased bringing their produce to market. These measures, rather than stabilizing the economy, only accelerated its collapse, demonstrating a fundamental misunderstanding of economic incentives and the true nature of value. The government, rather than addressing the root cause, its own fiscal mismanagement and currency debasement, attempted to legislate away the symptoms, like treating a raging fever by smashing the thermometer. Finally, the 7th mistake is the loss of social cohesion and the erosion of the tax base. As the economy falters, the tax revenues needed to maintain the state, its army, its bureaucracy, its infrastructure, dry up. The wealthy find ways to avoid taxes, often by moving their assets or fleeing to regions with more stable economies. The poor, struggling to survive, become disillusioned and rebellious. The social contract breaks down. For Rome, this meant that soldiers were often unpaid, borders became undefended, and the once mighty legions were reduced to ineffective mercenaries or regional militias. The central government, unable to collect taxes or enforce its will, became increasingly irrelevant. The system ultimately unravels, not from external invasion alone, but from an internal, financial bleeding out. The once sturdy house, weakened by debt and debasement, finally crumbles. Every empire, every great power, believed it was the exception. They believed their unique circumstances, their divine favor, their technological superiority, or their sheer will would allow them to defy these economic laws. This belief is, in itself, a symptom. It prevents honest assessment and corrective action. The mechanics of money and value are indifferent to flags or political systems. They are a universal language, an invisible ledger that transcends time and ideology. The cycle of sound money, debt-fueled expansion, debasement, inflation, loss of reserve status, desperate controls, and eventual collapse repeats with chilling regularity. By understanding these mechanisms, one can begin to read the warning signs: persistent and growing national debt, increasing reliance on monetary expansion, rising inflation, and a subtle but growing international distrust of a nation's currency. These are not isolated events but interconnected threads in a predictable tapestry of decline. The financial health of an empire is not merely an accounting exercise, it is the heartbeat of its very existence. Every great power believed it was different. The ledger disagreed. Subscribe, one collapse decoded at a time.